Welcome to our Monday workshop. And there is a description of our workshop in the chat, but I'll read it out to you. So today's workshop is with Dr. Samantha Duggan. The title is Recovery Paradoxes, Balancing Effort, Surrender, and Growth as a Parent in Recovery. Dr. Samantha Duggan is a behavioral psychologist with a background in addiction recovery, working in private practice with parents on family and parenting issues. Samantha is secretary of the UK-based All-Party Parliamentary Group, or APPG, for 12-Step Recovery from Addictions, a cross-party group of MPs and Lords working in the British Parliament, working to make 12-step recovery more available to those who need it. She is also a founder of Visible Recovery UK, an advocacy group for 12-step recovery. There are links to those groups in the chat. There's also a link where you can find out more about Samantha. And this is part of a three-part series that Samantha will be doing for us over the next 3 months. So this is part one of a three-part series. We'll put details on the series in the chat. There are also other talks by Samantha on our YouTube channel. So with that, Samantha, I'll turn it over to you. We really appreciate you doing this, and it's wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Great. Well, hello, everybody. Let's do my thank yous first so that I don't forget them. I want to say a huge thank you to the Berlin Circle for inviting me back. It's really lovely to be here again. And thank you to everybody who has come tonight to hear this talk. Especially thank you if you're somebody who's heard me before and you've come back. I'm very grateful. And if you've not heard me speak before, well, then thank you for taking the risk and for coming and giving up your time. I hope that everybody listening will get something of value from my talk tonight. And of course, I want to say that recovery principles apply. So take what you like and just leave the rest. Some things will, of course, resonate with you more than other things, and that is perfectly okay. Work with whatever feels right for you in this moment in time, because we are all at different places on our journeys, and different things make sense to different people at different times. Now, I want to add two further notes as well before I get into my talk tonight. I want to mention something about grandparents in recovery and parents of adult children. So because my private practice is with parents who have children who are, children age, under the age of 18, my examples that I tend to go to are usually about the under 18s, young children, kids in the very competency stage, the young teens, early teens. This is my private practice work. So these are the examples that come to mind very easily for me. My own children are also 18 and 20. So I've just been through that children-y stage. And that's where my head goes when I'm reaching for examples. But I'm talking about principles that can be used by grandparents. They can also be used by people who are in recovery dealing with adult children, and even spouses and colleagues and friends. These are principles that are really about getting on with people and having improved relationships. So that's one note. And then the other note I want to draw your attention to is that previously when I've spoken here at the Berlin Circle, I have ad-libbed. And this time I'm going to try something new. I've written a script, and if it seems like I'm sometimes reading, it's because I am. And that's because I want to test this idea that afterwards I have actually said everything that I wanted to say to you, because sometimes when you ad-lib, you forget. And even though that's not the end of the world, of course, and I love leaving room for higher power to act, I did think that I would try it a little bit differently this time and see how I felt afterwards. So that's a word about my script. I thought long and hard about where to begin my talk tonight, and I thought I could almost give it a new title, because this idea kept coming to me as I was thinking of examples and toying with the order that I wanted to go in. And I was toying with the idea of calling it Confessions of a Recovering Gentle Parent, because there's a sense in which this talk is the story of my journey from total commitment to attachment parenting to a more balanced approach. And I chose the image on the first slide, the cloud and the rain and the butterfly, because for me, it captures the joy and the pain and the heartache and the fulfillment that is the essence of being a parent, right? No rainbow without rain, right? So I'm speaking tonight about how I've come to understand that what we need to be aiming for as parents is what I call progress and balance. And I want to start with a story, but first I want to just say as well that I come tonight, yes, as a person with qualifications in psychology, and I work in private practice with parents, but really, and this is how I enjoy speaking to parents, and particularly in this forum, I enjoy speaking as just another parent in recovery. So I am a person in 12-step recovery myself. That for me means that I haven't had a drink or any other mind-altering substance for 16 years and counting, one day at a time. So that is a little bit about me. And tonight I'm talking about paradoxes. I want to tell a story. I want to tell the story of a big turning point in my journey towards this more balanced approach. And I might add, more effective approach. So I was on a play date with a mom that I had met through Codependence Anonymous, CODA. And she had a daughter around about the same age as mine. I think from memory, our daughters were around about 3.5. They hadn't started school yet. So it was summertime. We were on this play date in a playground. The two little girls were, exploring each other and the, playground things that were there for them. And the other mom and I were sitting on a blanket. We'd laid out our lunch. It was about lunchtime. And I suppose what I was thinking was I needed to be very mindful of my daughter because she was meeting somebody for the first time, whereas I knew this other mom a little bit from 12-step recovery meetings. And also, she was young. And at that stage in my journey as a mom, I had an operating principle in how I raised my children. I tried to live up to this idea all the time. And the idea was that I always gave my children my attention. I reasoned that children need their parents' attention, and parental attention is highly reinforcing. So when you turn your attention, I should say your positive attention on your child, you help them to feel seen and heard and to understand that they are loved. So I knew that it was a really important thing to do this, and I thought I should try to do it as much as possible. So that's a little bit of background about my attitude to that. So this young woman's daughter came over to her at some point and looked for her attention, and this mom refused to give it to her. She explained that she was having a conversation and having her lunch, and her daughter should just move away and go play and wait. So she made it really clear in the interaction with her daughter that she was prioritizing herself over her daughter's need or her daughter's desire for attention. I said nothing. I watched this, but this was deeply challenging to me at the time. I found it very hard to reconcile what I'd just witnessed in the playground with what I knew of this mom. So I knew that she was a mother who cared very much about being a good parent. I knew that she wanted to break the patterns of dysfunction from her own childhood and her family of origin. And it's worth saying as well that she was ahead of me on the recovery journey, not by very much, but she was ahead of me. And when I look back now, that makes sense to me. But at the time, I'll be perfectly honest, I thought she was being really harsh. Her little girl was upset. That's why she'd been looking for her attention. Well, actually, I'm not sure it was upset, but she certainly wanted her mom. And she didn't get the attention. And then she got a little bit more upset, but then she accepted it and she wandered off. So I noodled this idea around in my head when I got home, and I thought, what if it's okay to prioritize what I want sometimes? And at that point, I wasn't very well versed in the language of needs. I was good with feelings. I'd been doing enough recovery to start to be able to identify what I felt at any moment in time. But even though I knew about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I knew about needs to that level, I hadn't yet done a deep dive, which I was going to do, into Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication. And that massively expanded my understanding of the motivating power of universal human needs. But that interaction between that mother and daughter shifted something dramatically for me that day. And what I would say now is that it made me realize that I was deprioritizing myself to a dangerous and unnecessary, actually, an unnecessary degree, and that there was every chance that it might, in fact, even be having negative repercussions for my daughter. This was sort of my first inkling that when we try to parent in the opposite way to which we were raised as children, we often end up generating perhaps opposite, perhaps simply equal difficulties, even if they manifest in a slightly different way. So, because I thought I had not received sufficient attention in my childhood, I was attempting to give my daughter attention every time she looked for it. And already by the time she was 3.5, it was running me ragged. And if I was really honest, I was starting to think that it was making my daughter more demanding and perhaps even inappropriately dependent on my attention in a way that was, in fact, unhelpful for her. So I use this story to illustrate one of the key paradoxes, or the concept of paradox, that I'm going to be speaking about tonight. I'm going to look at 6 paradoxes in a moment. So a paradox is a situation where seemingly contradictory statements or concepts apply, and both are true. So let's take the attention one that I've just been talking about. Children need their parents' attention. That's true, no doubt about it. Sometimes children should not get their parents' attention. Also true. That was what was playing out that day in the park. So I want to emphasize that for me, this story highlights a fundamental lesson that became a cornerstone of my approach to parenting, which is balance. It's not just about one extreme or the other, either giving all of your attention or withholding it entirely, but finding a healthy middle ground. And I came to realize that parenting isn't about being perfect or always available. It's about being responsive in a way that's sustainable for both the parent and the child. In trying to overcompensate for the lack of attention I received as a child, I was creating an imbalance, and it wasn't serving either myself or my daughter. I thought constant attention was the answer, but what I saw that day in the park taught me that boundaries and self-care are just as important. That mother was teaching her daughter, and I might say me as well, that sometimes her needs, her daughter's needs, might not be immediately met, and that's okay. It wasn't neglect. It was a lesson in patience, in autonomy, and the importance of balance and give and take in relationships. So the first paradox I want to talk about in a little bit more depth tonight is this paradox between powerlessness and responsibility. So for anybody who is familiar with 12-step recovery, I know these ideas will sound familiar. We often acknowledge in 12-step meetings that we are powerless over people, places, and things, over our addictions. But this idea can be unsettling when it comes to parenting, or at least I certainly found it so at times in my early years. How is it that we are powerless over our children, yet we still bear the immense responsibility of raising them? This paradox, of course, aligns with our wonderful serenity prayer, which asks for the serenity to accept what we cannot change, courage to change what we can, and wisdom to know the difference. So, how do you apply those principles to parenting? Let's talk about the powerlessness bit first. We cannot control other people's emotions or actions, and that includes those of our children, even, or maybe especially, our small children. Attempts to control or usually lead eventually to frustration and unfortunately, distrust. However, powerlessness does not mean inaction. It's about focusing on what we can control. That, of course, is our actions, our reactions, our feelings and needs, our boundaries. We're powerless over our children's feelings, yes, but we are responsible for creating the type of structured environment where they can learn and grow and become responsible and in control of their own feelings. This distinction is crucial. So again, we can't control children, but we're responsible for leading them. And a key way we do that is by setting boundaries and consequences. I'll be talking in my third talk, I think it is, in this series about boundaries, because it's such a huge topic and I had requests often to talk about it more. So I will be dealing with that in a whole extra talk. But for now, let's just talk about the difference between being in control and being in charge. When we try to control children's behavior, and it's often out of fear, this tends to backfire, not least because it denies their autonomy, but also because when we're in fear, it's not usually our best behavior. When we're in charge, on the other hand, we're leading. We're setting firm but loving boundaries, and this creates that sense of safety that children need. When parents fail to be in charge, children can actually feel untethered, and that can lead to power struggles and emotional chaos in the home. I often see this in families that, like me at first, misinterpret gentle or attachment parenting, or like I did, apply it without a sense of balance. And while attachment methods can foster closeness, treating children as equals in decision-making, I believe, is a mistake. Families are hierarchies and they need the parents at the top. If the parents aren't in charge, there's a high risk that emotions, the children's and the parents, will take control. And this creates a very stressful environment where people get dysregulated and the huge overwhelmed feelings can get into the driving seat I talk about. So how do we balance powerlessness and being in charge? Again, the answer lies in deeply understanding what we control, what we can control, and the serenity prayer is our friend in getting that deeper understanding. Powerlessness is not passivity. If rules are broken, we don't give up. I know it can be tempting, especially if you're tired after a day at work. You've got to enforce your consequences. And it's worth saying that you may be powerless over how your child feels about the rules, but you maintain the rules and the consequences for the family's well-being. And I'm going to ad-lib here a little story about my daughter's complete refusal over many years to ever be happy about my rule about leggings and crop tops. So the rule in my house was that sports clothes are for sports. And while she was between the ages of from about 8 or 9, she started to get interested in wearing these crop tops. And it was my opinion, still is, that they're not appropriate attire for young girls. And so I wouldn't allow them. And she fought me on it tooth and nail all the way. We had some very unpleasant interactions, but I stuck with my boundary and I did my best. Sometimes I would give myself, A+ for how I handled it. Other times, if I was tired or hungry, maybe I didn't handle it as well. But when she was in her mid-teens, she eventually came to me and she said she was glad that I had held that line, that she was very happy with how she now understood these questions and issues, or they're around modesty. And I used to say to her as well, she had some girls who were Muslim in her class, and I used to say, I'm not having any of the self-pity that you're not allowed to wear crop tops because, relatively speaking, our modesty rules are quite lenient. It gets a whole lot stricter. So in enforcing that boundary and sticking with my rule, detachment came in really handy. In Al-Anon, detachment means letting go of trying to control outcomes. It allows us to guide children without forcing them into specific responses. Getting this balance right allows us to remain compassionate without being permissive, firm without being harsh. We're aiming for emotionally resilient children. And by practicing emotional regulation ourselves, so taking a pause, breathing, reminding yourself to detach from whatever's going on with your child, reminding myself that I'm not aiming for control over her. I'm just in charge. The more I work on my own regulation like that, the better I am at being responsible without falling into fear, and at loving my daughter and son without falling into coercive attachment. So to summarize the powerlessness and responsibility section, understand what you can and can't control, practice detached involvement, and very importantly, have consequences for breach of boundaries. Paradox 2 is improvement versus acceptance. So in 12-step recovery, we focus on improving ourselves, working on our character defects, striving for personal growth. The Just for Today card reminds us, however, that we don't try to improve or regulate anybody except ourselves. But as parents, once again, we have the responsibility to help guide our children's growth. So balancing this with accepting them as they are is an ongoing challenge. Let's begin again with the improvement side of things. So from birth, we guide our children through the various stages of development, learning to walk and talk and get on with other children. And especially between the age of about 7 and the early tween teen years, children have a deep need for competence. And in that time period, our job is to provide them with opportunities for improvement, whether that's solving more complex maths problems or riding a bike, learning new skills. This is how we support the development of their healthy self-esteem from doing esteemable things. But overemphasizing improvement can cause us to overlook the importance of acceptance. Acceptance fosters trust and emotional security in our children, communicates that they are loved as they are, despite their struggles. When we accept their limitations, their individual learning pace, we create that safe foundation for growth. That type of acceptance strengthens their sense of belonging within their families, and it allows them to feel confident in their uniqueness. Again, the balance between the two is critical. When children learn to walk, parents tend to do this balancing act quite naturally. We encourage them to walk, but we accept that they fall. We don't chastise them if they fall over. We don't limit them from trying to learn to walk out of our fear. We create safe environments where they can stumble and get back up. And when we watch children learn to walk, we discover that improvement naturally involves failure and mistakes, and it's not a parent's job to prevent those, but to guide them through those mistakes and failures so that a child will develop resilience. Every child will grow at their own pace. Some develop more early and others later. Early and late can be quite normal. Our role is to respect our child's individuality while supporting their development. Just as we don't force a child to walk before they're ready, we shouldn't push a child to grow faster in any direction than they can comfortably manage. I thought I'd tell a quick little story here about balancing these two things with my son in particular. So he was around 10, so very late elementary school and into middle school age. And I decided to change his school. He had been in a school that was very progressive. Teachers as well as pupils were on first name terms. There was no uniform. Homework was given, but it wasn't compulsory to do it. And so I moved him because I got the sense that this wasn't helping him and he was starting to disengage from school. So I put him into a much, not a much more normal, in fact, almost the other end of the spectrum. He went to a quite high achieving, academically focused, all boys school. And he was behind. He was very behind in maths, actually. And so he needed extra lessons. And then at home, around our kitchen table, we had many painful sessions where I tried to balance this need to accept him where he is with his need for improvement. And we had plenty of frustration and tears and sometimes we were very cross with each other at times. And same again, some evenings I did it better than others. But my sense was that he needed me to encourage him to improve. And he eventually caught up. And today he's a third-year engineering student. So I was right. He was good at maths. And it was right to not let him quit. So ultimately, improvement and acceptance are two sides of the same coin. True acceptance does not mean we stop encouraging growth, but rather that we embrace both current abilities and potential. By finding that balance, we help children build resilience and the confidence they need to thrive. So, to summarize, encourage growth, but don't force change. Get good at differentiating between discipline and control. And of course, recognize and respect the child's individuality while setting healthy boundaries. Now, the third paradox is effort versus surrender. People who saw my talk on surrender will recognize my beloved bird on the side of the screen there, and contrasting that with the birds at war, shall we say. So the balance between these two is something that I think every parent wrestles with, between taking action and letting go, between disciplining and accepting, between guiding our children and acknowledging that some things really are way beyond our control. Parenting itself requires immense effort, especially, I found, when it comes to discipline. Establishing boundaries and consistently enforcing them takes really hard work. For instance, I hear this complaint over and over again: a messy teenage bedroom. Now, it's very tempting to think that teenagers, well, they're teenagers, they're going to have a messy bedroom. But giving up on enforcing your rules is not true surrender. It's avoiding responsibility. Real effort means teaching children the importance of boundaries through consistent discipline that encourages learning rather than punishment. Again, remember, we're going to have a whole talk on boundaries, so don't worry if I seem to be going through some of these ideas really quickly. Surrender, on the other hand, is about letting go of the need to control every detail. I'll say it again. You can't force your children to behave exactly as you want. But surrender doesn't mean doing nothing. You're still responsible for creating that structured environment where hopefully they will be gradually learning how to make the kinds of choices that mean that you're often not at odds with them. So you can't make a child always keep their room tidy, but you can enforce a consequence. So yes, I'll drop you to the train station as soon as your room is tidy. That's what I mean by that. Surrender is about letting go of outcomes, but effort is required to ensure the boundaries are respected. Nevertheless, if we lean too heavily on effort, we create tension and frustration. If we focus only on surrender, and especially if we allow bad behavior to go unchecked, well, then we risk becoming permissive, which isn't healthy for our children or for our family dynamic. Parenting demands that we put in the work to guide them. This balance of effort and surrender is also important in our own personal journey, especially in recovery. Just as we put effort into parenting, we must also work on our own emotional and spiritual growth. Step 11 calls for improving our connection with a higher power, which requires consistent effort through mindfulness, through setting intentions, through practicing emotional regulation, through setting aside time for prayer and meditation. If we want to model healthy behavior for our children, we've got to put the effort into becoming balanced, emotionally sober individuals. At the same time, we need to surrender aspects of ourselves that hinder good parenting, or I should say, or prefer to say, good enough parenting. Whether that's fear or anger or the need for control, we must ask our higher power for help in letting go of these defects. It's important to remember that being a good parent doesn't mean being perfect. Of course not. But it does mean being humble enough to look to continuously improve and surrendering the need to control outcomes. Ultimately, one of the greatest lessons we can teach our children is the need for balance between effort and surrender. Life requires effort. It takes discipline, learning, and growth, but it also requires surrender, accepting that we are not in control of everything. When we model this balance, we not only raise healthy and respectful children, but we also will grow on our own spiritual journey. So a little summary there of effort versus surrender. Set intentions, take actions. I'll go into that more again. That applies both to our own recovery journey and also in disciplining children. So I'll explain that more in my third talk. Remember to practice daily your surrender. And we hear it a lot in recovery, expectations, resentments waiting to happen. It's a good idea to let go of those and be open to perhaps unexpected outcomes. I like the expression, keeping all options on the table. So that's the first three, what I call recovery paradoxes. And these next three are what I call parenting paradoxes. The first one, the big one, and this is my story that I opened with, was about attachment parenting. So attachment versus behaviorist parenting. It's easy to think of them as either or, but again, I'm proposing that it's not either or, it's both and. I know that many parents passionately identify with either one of these approaches. In recovery circles, I find that attachment parenting is in fact quite common. Attachment parenting emphasizes honoring children's feelings. But outside of recovery circles, parents often use behaviorist principles, relying on rewards and consequences to shape behavior. Through my experience as a parent and also in private practice, I've seen that both approaches have valuable truths, but if parents swing too far in either direction, like I was doing in my early years, it leads to challenges. The key again is finding balance that fosters both emotional health and well-regulated behavior. So attachment parenting, let's go there first. This focuses on building the secure bond with the child, prioritizes emotional needs, validating feelings. Many parents who grew up without emotional validation like to adopt this approach and want to create a safer environment for their children than they grew up with. This method helps children feel understood, safe to express emotions like anger or sadness. However, an overfocus or a sole focus on attachment parenting can, not necessarily, but can result in a lack of boundaries, where children end up struggling to manage their emotions and don't learn to self-regulate. Children need emotional validation, but they also need to understand limits and accountability. Behaviorist style parenting, on the other hand, and I chose this lovely illustration. I think it's fantastic because, it's easy to find a lot of information online that acts as though behaviorism has no truth in it. And that's simply not true. Rats will press levers for food. So behaviorist style parenting focuses more on shaping behavior through rewards and consequences. Positive reinforcement encourages behavior, leads to an increase in behavior. So we want to use that to increase desired behavior. While punishment, I know it's very unfashionable nowadays, but I'll explain more in the talk on boundaries. And I have done on my other talk that I did previously on parenting in recovery for the Berlin Circle. I explained the technical definitions of punishment. Punishment is anything that reduces a behavior. So if you throw your child a look and they stop what they're doing, that's punishment. Yeah. I find a lot of parents tell me now that while the look was sufficient to stop them in their tracks when they were kids, they find it doesn't work with their own children today. So Over-reliance on rewards, however, can create children who behave only for external reasons and lack intrinsic motivation. As an example to illustrate this, I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of somebody who knew how to say sorry, but you had the sense that they weren't feeling sorry. That's a person who has learned what to say, but the feeling of contrition or regret or remorse and the desire, true desire to repair the relationship is lacking. So once again, the challenge is in integrating the two approaches. Attachment parenting gives children the emotional foundation they need, while behaviorism helps teach discipline. Focus solely on attachment and neglect boundaries, you'll end up with children who don't understand limits. These are the children who are in danger of becoming tornadoes, blowing through the lives of others. Conversely, behaviorism without emotional support can damage the parent-child bond. And when the parent-child bond becomes irreparably damaged, then things get very unhappy indeed. Let's have another little example about getting the balance right between these from my own personal experience as a parent. So my daughter often came out of school very upset and complaining about whatever had happened in school that day. And it seemed like there was always something to complain about when she came out of school. Remember, I'm committed to being an attachment parent. And so I listen and validate her feelings. And she's quite a talkative type, so often I didn't have to do anything to empathize and validate except nod and go, ooh, yeah, that's all empathy. That's all to the good. However, my daughter's capacity to vent was immense. She could go on for 45, 50, 55 minutes until I had nothing left to give. It wasn't helping her process her emotions. And this is notwithstanding the textbooks that say that if people get to express themselves and process their feelings, then it'll diminish. Name it to tame it. I'm all for the whole brain child literature. This is all to the good, but it wasn't working with my child in the real world. I realized I needed a boundary. Listening to her, yeah, essential, but there's also a need for limits on how long we dwell on frustration. By setting a time limit, I was applying behaviorist principles to help her regulate her emotions without invalidating her feelings. And I was also being honest about my capacity to listen. So I was practicing our recovery principle of honesty. And I was practicing self-care for myself and making sure that I matter too. Once again, this illustrates the need for balance. We honor children's emotions, but we set appropriate limits to guide their behavior. Because effective parenting requires us to stay mindful of the outcome that is occurring. Are our children becoming more emotionally regulated as they get older? Are they respectful? I know that word is very unpopular for some attachment parents. They like the idea of parents being respectful to their children, but they're very wary of when parents perceive disrespect from their children. I'm not as worried about that these days. I think I can trust myself to know when I'm witnessing disrespectful behavior. That's not to say I don't go under to find out what's going on for her, but there's a limit. We all treat each other with respect. If our children are not becoming regulated and more emotionally regulated as they mature, and our families are not going more or less the way we want them to be, we need to reassess our methods. The balance between attachment and behaviorist parenting is not about choosing one over the other. It's about combining emotional validation with clear boundaries to raise children who are secure as well as accountable. You stay mindful of the balance and you will create an environment where children thrive. In sum, to integrate these two approaches, yes, create secure attachment. This is the foundation really for all learning. Implement logical consequences, and I'll talk about logical and natural and related consequences in detail in a later talk, but consequences can be implemented with empathy. So all in all, you need to adopt a balanced approach to discipline. And in fact, I'm going to now go a little bit more into this balanced approach in the paradox of mercy and justice, which is very relevant for when we're disciplining our children. So I keep saying over and over that parenting is a delicate balancing act, especially when it comes to navigating this paradox. The two virtues are crucial in raising emotionally healthy children. Again, finding the balance can be challenging. Applied unevenly, we get harmful outcomes, but together, these are the two essential pillars of love. Too much mercy, and we get children lacking boundaries and self-regulation. Too much justice, we damage trust and emotional security. So we want to combine discipline with understanding and justice with empathy. We have to figure out when to offer one or the other and not lean too heavily in either direction so we don't get those unintended consequences. Mercy in parenting involves recognizing that children, like all human beings, are imperfect and they can make mistakes due to tiredness or inexperience or reaching the point of overwhelm. And in moments like that, we can show mercy and respond with empathy, offering children the space to learn and grow without having harsh consequences. This fosters an environment of emotional safety where children learn that it's okay to make mistakes and recover from them. But over-reliance in that direction and we get problems. Without boundaries, children are not going to learn the self-discipline or the self-discipline we'd like to see them have, and they may expect the world to always excuse their behavior. And this again can lead to a lack of emotional regulation, a skewed sense of entitlement, and that can affect their relationships and success later in life. Parents need to remember, I believe, that love holds children accountable for their actions. We really learn this in recovery as well. It is a loving act to go back and do your amends. So justice is therefore part of love. It helps children understand that their actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are unpleasant. Justice in the home is not about just punishing out of anger, but it's about teaching important life lessons. And a really important point, especially if you have more than one child, justice ensures fairness for all members of the family. If one child consistently gets away with bad behavior, it can breed resentment among siblings and create an unhealthy family dynamic. Now, an excess of justice creates a different set of challenges. If a parent is overly strict and rigid, that causes emotional distance. When a child views their parent only as a disciplinarian, it leads to a tense and anxious home environment, devoid of warmth and understanding. So ultimately, the key to successful parenting lies in striking the balance between these two. And I want to say no parent gets it right all the time. That's not what's required. It's quite natural to make mistakes along the way. But the goal is to keep striving for that equilibrium. And what I've observed in my own children is that now that they're older, they can look back and see that myself and their dad, we really tried to get this balance right. And I think now that they're older, they can recognize that what they were watching us doing was wrestling with this and sometimes making mistakes, but giving it our best shot. And I think they appreciate it now. Summary of this one. So context-driven discipline is really important. Is your child just tired and really you just need to shoo them to bed instead of coming in with a consequence? Mercy is an opportunity for learning. Justice creates accountability. And there's always an opportunity for second chances and self-reflection. The final paradox I want to discuss tonight is empathy versus encouragement. Together, these two are really important for raising resilient children who can regulate their own emotions. Again, the challenge is knowing when to apply each. So let me define empathy as I understand it. This is the ability to understand another person's feelings, but to convey that sense that you understand them. In parenting, this often boils down to just acknowledging and validating children's feelings. That's pain, fear, frustration, all of those things. When we respond with empathy, not all the time, you don't have to do it all the time. Sometimes you don't have time to do it. Sometimes you don't have the energy to do it. Sometimes you don't have the mood to do it because you're too cross. But when you do it enough, you foster a sense of security and you build the trust between parent and child that allows for the relationship to become very healthy and functional. And you also allow the child to develop the trust of themselves to explore the world and take risks. This is laying the foundations for emotional intelligence. So I use the example here from the picture. If a child falls off their bike, an empathic response can be, oh, I know that hurt. It's okay to feel scared right now. So that's creating the emotional safety, helping them regulate their emotions. But empathy alone is not enough. It is essential for children to feel understood, adults too, by the way, but they also need encouragement to overcome challenges and develop resilience. Encouragement means helping them believe in their ability to push through difficulties. The word itself, courage, encouragement, comes from the French cœur, meaning heart. So to encourage is to strengthen the heart. After we empathize with a child's fall, encouragement nudges them to get back up on their bike and try again. So getting the balance right between acknowledging fear and pushing them to persevere, this is actually how we develop resilience, which I know is such a buzzword in parenting and in education at the moment. You've got to also consider your child's unique temperament. My next talk is going to be all about temperament, so join me for that one if you're curious about that. Some children are just much more fearful than others, and it can be very difficult for parents of these children to figure out what an appropriate balance with such a child looks like. Too much empathy without encouragement leads a child to feel helpless or dependent or risk averse. But too much encouragement without empathy can make children feel pressured or misunderstood. It can create anxiety rather than resilience. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. Some children gain confidence from confronting fears, and others need a lot more emotional support first. As parents, you know your child best and can judge when to lean into empathy and when to offer encouragement. Again, it's all about balance. Empathy, remember, helps children feel seen and heard. Encouragement fosters resilience, and courage. Both are necessary for emotionally healthy, competent individuals. Remember, they're not opposing forces. They complement each other. Together, they form the foundation of love and trust and resilience. Our task as parents is to walk that fine line, knowing that sometimes we'll emphasize one over the other, but striving for overall balance is the key to raising children who feel supported and capable. So, to balance empathy with encouragement, remember that empathy is the foundation for trust, but encouragement leads to resilience. You're going to use the two together to teach emotional regulation, and remember to avoid victimhood in a child by modeling optimism and hope. Here are all 6 again for us to just review. Powerlessness versus responsibility, improvement versus acceptance, effort versus surrender, attachment versus behaviorism, mercy versus justice, and empathy versus encouragement. We're aiming for progress and balance. Thank you very much for listening. I think now it's time for questions.
Yes, thank you, Samantha. What a wonderful presentation. I love your, like I said earlier, your slides are works of art. Beautiful presentation. Thank you. And again, thank you for putting on this series, very valuable series for us.